Here's a fact about your body that should not be true. You are a tropical animal. Look at the evidence. You have no fur, you have somewhere around 2 to 4 million sweat glands, which is the highest density of any mammal on Earth. Your comfortable temperature, undressed and sitting still, is about 27 degrees. Not 20, 27. Everything about you is built to dump heat, not hold it. You are equipment for the African savanna. And here's the number that should stop you. Your ancestors took that body into places where January runs at -30. Not visited, lived, raised children through it. 60,000 years of winters on a chassis designed for the equator. So this video is not a list of quaint survival hacks. It is the story of how a naked tropical primate cheated physics, and some of the tricks are genuinely stranger than you expect. Here's the route. What cold does to you, the 4 real tricks, the fat, the needle, and the bill. Let's go. Start with the honest arithmetic, because people underestimate this badly. You produce about 100 watts of heat sitting still. That is a light bulb. That is your entire output. Now put you outside at -20, naked, no wind. Your skin temperature falls in minutes. Shivering begins, and shivering can raise your heat output by a factor of 4 or 5 for a short while. It also consumes your fuel fast, and it wrecks your fine motor control. That is a catastrophe when your hands are the only tools you have. Core temperature at 35 degrees, you are clumsy. At 33, your judgment goes and you stop making sensible decisions. At 30, you are unconscious. The whole margin is 5 degrees. That is what you are working with. And here is what makes it worse. Your body has one automatic defense, which is to shut the blood down at the surface, and it is a blunt one. Blood flow to your hands can drop to a fraction of normal. Your fingers cool toward the ambient air. So the automatic response protects your core by sacrificing the exact part of you that builds shelters, ties knots, and works a fire. Your physiology and your survival are pulling in opposite directions. That is the paradox. Everything that follows is a workaround. Trick 1, the fire, and the part of it that nobody talks about. Everybody knows about fire. The interesting question is what a fire actually buys you at -20, and the answer is less than you think. Radiant heat falls off fast with distance. Sit 2 meters from a decent campfire and the effect on your body is modest. You get a hot front and a freezing back, which anyone who has camped in real cold knows intimately. So the trick was never the flame. The trick was the geometry around it. You put a rock face or a built wall behind the fire to throw the radiation forward. You put your shelter opening toward it. You sleep between the fire and the reflector, so you are inside the warm zone rather than beside it. In effect, you build a rough parabola out of stone and hide, and you sit at the focus. And then there is the second half, which is keeping it. Making fire from nothing, in wet cold, with numb hands, is genuinely hard. So you do not. You bank it. You cover the coals with a layer that starves the fuel of air, and it smolders for 8 or 10 hours. We have direct evidence of the alternative too. People carried fire. Tinder fungus, that hard shelf fungus off birch trees, will hold a glowing ember for hours. The man found in the Alps was carrying pieces of it. 5,300 years old, with tinder fungus in his kit and a lump of iron pyrite. He was not carrying the means to make fire. He was carrying the means to not have to. Trick 2. And this one is a nutrition problem disguised as a weather problem. Winter does something specific to animals. They lose their fat. A red deer in March can be down to 2 or 3% body fat, and everything else is lean muscle. Now here's the trap. You cannot live on lean meat. Not for long. Your liver has a ceiling on how much protein it can turn into energy. The limit sits somewhere around 1/3 of your calories. Push past 40% and the nitrogen load exceeds what you can clear. The result has a name from the fur trade era: rabbit starvation. You eat constantly, you feel full, and you weaken anyway. Explorers recorded it in detail. Plenty of meat and men getting steadily worse. So a winter hunter is not really hunting for meat. He is hunting for fat, and in a starved winter animal, there is barely any on the carcass. The fat is hidden in 2 places, the brain and the marrow inside the long bones. Marrow is roughly 80% fat by energy. And this is why archaeological sites are full of long bones smashed in a consistent way, with a hammerstone, at the same points. That is not vandalism and it is not scavenging. That is a processing line. And they went further. There is a technique called bone grease rendering. You smash the spongy bone ends into fragments, put them in a container of water, and hold it near boiling for hours. The fat floats and you skim it. Now think about what that requires. A watertight container before pottery. So you use a hide-lined pit and you heat it by dropping in stones from the fire. Hours of work for a few hundred grams of grease. It is the least glamorous activity in prehistory, and it is the difference between March and April. You were not designed to be cold. Read that again, because it is the center of this whole video. There is no cold weather system in you. There is no winter coat you grow. Every other mammal at that latitude solves winter with its own body. It doubles its coat. It lays down a fat layer. Or it sleeps through the whole thing. You do none of the three. Your only adaptation to winter is that you can think about it in September. That is the actual trick, and it is the reason the list matters. Everything your ancestors did in winter was external. A fire outside the body, fat eaten from another animal's bones, a skin taken off something that did grow a coat. You survived the Ice Age by borrowing other species' adaptations and wearing them. And there is a control group. There were other humans in that cold, and they tried the other approach. Neanderthals were built for it. Genuinely built. Shorter limbs, wider rib cage, heavier bone. A body shape that reduces surface area relative to volume, which is the classic mammalian answer to cold. The nose was part of it too. Large, complex inside, good for warming and moistening freezing air before it reaches the lungs. Now the cost. Estimates of Neanderthal daily energy needs run high. Some put winter requirements somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 calories a day. That is an enormous amount of hunting for a body that solved cold with meat. Then look at what is missing from their toolkit. Scrapers, yes. Hide-working tools, plenty. Eyed needles, no. Not one, anywhere, in over 100,000 years of sites. So the picture is this. One group solved winter with its body and ate 5,000 calories to run it. The other group solved winter with a sewn sleeve and ate a great deal less. Only one of those groups is still here. That is not a story about intelligence. Neanderthals were not stupid. It is a story about what happens when you put the solution outside the body, where it can be improved in a season instead of 100,000 years. Trick 3, and here is where the lice come in. We wanted to know when people started wearing fitted clothing. Clothes rot, so the direct evidence runs out fast. The oldest surviving fragments are a few thousand years old, and the Ice Age is 50 times further back than that. So Mark Stoneking and colleagues did something sideways. They looked at lice. Humans carry two closely related parasites. The head louse lives on your scalp. The body louse lives in clothing and comes to the skin to feed. And the body louse cannot exist without clothes. It has nowhere to live. Its entire habitat is a garment. So the moment the body louse split from the head louse is the moment clothing became a permanent, worn, everyday thing. And you can date a split like that from the genetics. The answer came back somewhere in the range of 80,000 to 170,000 years ago, depending on the assumptions. Read that again. We dated the invention of clothing by asking a parasite when it moved house. But there is a second, sharper date, and this is the one that matters for winter. Draped clothing is easy. You throw a hide over yourself. Fitted clothing, sewn to the shape of a body, with sealed seams at wrist and neck, is a completely different technology. And fitted clothing needs an eyed needle. A needle with a hole in it, thin enough to pull sinew through hide without splitting it. Those appear around 40,000 years ago, and the oldest come from Siberia. There is a bone needle from Denisova Cave dated at roughly 50,000. Ian Gilligan has argued the case in detail. The needle is not a sewing accessory. The needle is the piece of equipment that let a tropical animal occupy the Arctic. A sealed sleeve is the difference between a garment and a chimney. Look at the map that follows. Fitted clothing appears, and then people are living above the Arctic Circle. Yana in northern Siberia, 71 degrees north, 32,000 years ago. A needle got us there, not a spear, a needle. And now the physics of the garment itself, because fur does not work the way people assume. Fur is not warm, hair is not warm. Nothing in a coat produces heat. What a coat does is trap air and stop it moving. Still air is the insulator. The hair is just scaffolding holding the air in place. So the number that matters is loft, thickness, not weight, not density, not how impressive the animal looked. Caribou hide is the champion, and the reason is beautiful. The hairs are hollow. Each one is a tiny sealed tube of air, and a pelt of them is thousands of those tubes standing on end. Arctic peoples chose caribou over bear, over wolf, over seal for the inner layer. Not for prestige, for loft. Now the rule that follows, and every Arctic culture has a version of it: never sweat. Here is why. Moisture fills the air spaces. Filled air spaces conduct heat maybe 20 times faster than dry ones. So a person who works hard in a good parka soaks the loft from the inside and then stops moving, and the garment they are relying on has quietly become a wet blanket. That is why traditional clothing is built to be opened, hoods thrown back, fronts loosened. You vent constantly, while walking, in temperatures that would end an unprepared person in an hour. Read that again. The most advanced cold weather technology in prehistory was a system for staying slightly too cool on purpose. The garment is easy. The discipline is the hard part. Trick 4, and it is the one that sounds like nonsense until you check the numbers. You build with snow. Snow is mostly air. Fresh, loose snow is 90 to 95% air by volume, and air that cannot move is one of the best insulators there is. So the inside of a good snow shelter, with one person in it, sits between 0 and -5. Outside runs at -30, sometimes -40. That is a 30-degree swing, produced by nothing but 100 watts of body heat and a material you can dig with your hands. The refinements are lovely. You build a sleeping platform higher than the entrance. Cold air pools in the pit below you. Warm air stays on the shelf. You cut a small vent because a sealed snow shelter with a lamp in it will quietly poison you. You line the inside with hide so meltwater runs down the wall rather than onto you. Every one of those details is a solved problem, passed down in a place where getting it wrong once was final. And where there was no snow to build with, and no wood either, they used what the steppe did have: mammoths. Go to Mezhirich in Ukraine about 15,000 years ago. 4 dwellings, built out of bone. The numbers are absurd. One structure used around 150 mammoth bones, skulls set as the foundation ring, mandibles stacked in a herringbone pattern up the walls, 95 of them on a single dwelling, tusks arched over the entrance. Estimates of the total mass run past 20 tons. That is not a shelter somebody threw together in an afternoon. That is a building. Then look at the fuel problem, because the mammoth steppe had almost no trees. So the hearths at these sites are full of bone. Fresh bone, fat-rich, will hold a flame once it is going, and there was a great deal of it lying around. So the fuel and the walls and the food were all the same animal. The whole settlement is one species, converted into architecture. And outside the dwellings, pits, dug down into ground that stayed frozen year-round. Meat put in those pits in autumn, kept through the winter. Read that again. They had freezers, 15,000 years ago, without a single moving part, by digging a hole in the right place. Some of you are thinking that people simply got tougher, that they acclimatized, and that this whole thing is about willpower and hard living. Fair question, and there is a real experiment on it. In the 1950s, Per Scholander and colleagues ran a study in the Central Australian desert. Their subjects were Aboriginal men who slept outdoors, near naked, between small fires. Night temperatures dropped close to freezing. They wired them up and compared them to Europeans doing the same thing. The Europeans shivered all night, raised their metabolic rate, and barely slept. The Aboriginal sleepers did something different. They let their skin cool much further without shivering, dropped their heat production, and slept through. That is genuine acclimation, and it is measurable. But now look at the size of the effect. It let them tolerate a night close to 0 degrees, with a fire, in a desert. It did nothing for -30. There is no amount of toughness that gets a person through a Siberian January. The gap between what acclimation can buy and what the Ice Age demanded is a factor of 10, and only technology covers it. And there is a modern version of that experiment, which is better controlled. Wouter van Marken-Lichtenbelt and colleagues put volunteers in rooms at 15 to 17 degrees, a couple of hours a day, 10 days straight. The result is real and small. Brown fat activity goes up. Non-shivering heat production increases. People report feeling more comfortable in the cold. It is a genuine physiological shift in 10 days in ordinary adults. Which tells you two things at once. Your cold machinery is still in there and it responds. And it is nowhere near enough on its own. And there is one case that shows the whole arc, beginning to end, inside a single lifetime. The Haenyeo are women divers on Jeju Island off Korea. For centuries, they worked the seafloor by breath hold all year, including winter water around 10 degrees, in cotton suits. Researchers measured them in the 1960s. Their basal metabolic rate in winter ran markedly above other Korean women, something in the order of 30% higher. Their bodies had rebuilt themselves into heaters. Then, in the 1970s, they got wetsuits, and the adaptation went away. Within about a decade of measurements, the winter metabolic difference had faded toward normal. Sit with that. Not over generations, not through selection. One technology arrived, the challenge stopped, and the response switched off in the same women who had it. That is what happened to all of us. It just happened slowly enough that nobody noticed. So, what ended it? The chimney did, and then the thermostat finished the job. Look at the order. For most of history, a house had a fire in the middle and a hole in the roof. Smoky and thermally hopeless, because most of the heat left through the hole. Then the chimney spreads through Europe from around the 12th century, and rooms get cleaner and colder in the corners. Then enclosed stoves from the 1500s onward, which keep far more of the heat in the room. Then, in the 1800s, boilers and pipes carry heat into rooms with no fire in them at all. And in 1885, an American school teacher patented a device that opened a furnace damper automatically when a room cooled. The thermostat. The moment temperature stopped being something you manage and became something you set. Now the numbers on what that did. In the 1970s, average indoor winter temperature in British homes sat around 12 to 16 degrees. Today it is around 19 to 20. And people in wealthy countries now spend something like 90% of their lives indoors. So the modern human lives at a nearly constant 20 degrees all year for their whole life. Your body has not experienced a real thermal challenge in months, possibly years. And the bill is measurable. Brown fat, the tissue that produces heat without shivering, is abundant in infants and declines through adult life. It is also visible in a smaller share of adults who live warm than in those regularly exposed to cold. Outdoor workers in cold climates carry more of it than office workers of the same age. It is not that we lost the machinery, we stopped giving it a reason to exist. So what if the tricks were never really about the cold? What if all of them are the same move, made 5 times? The reflector wall, the banked embers, the marrow, the needle, the snow platform. Do not adapt to the environment. Build a small pocket of Africa and carry it with you. Look at what that reframes. The clothes you are wearing are not decoration, and they are not modesty. They are a portable tropical climate, invented over 80,000 years ago, refined with a needle 40,000 years ago. And you are sitting inside one right now. Your house is the same object at a larger scale, 20 degrees, all winter. Your ancestors would recognize exactly what you have done, because they were doing it with a rock wall and a hide. We traded a body that could handle the cold for a body that never has to, and most of us never even knew it was gone. So the next time you feel that first shock of proper cold air, notice what happens. The tightening in your hands, the catch in your breathing. That is a tropical animal being reminded of something. It has had that reminder 2,000 winters in a row, and it has never once adapted because it never needed to. Now I want to hear from you. Of the 4, which one would you least like to do without? The fire, the fat, the needle, or the snow? And be honest about the second question. What is the coldest you have ever actually been, outdoors, with no way to get warm quickly? Put it in the comments because I suspect for most of us, the honest answer is embarrassing, and mine is a bus stop.